us. So please, yes, Maharaj, Swapna says, and yes, Raka says. Okay, so namaste. Sorry for, and I deeply appreciate your great patience. So let me begin. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritang Garbhavasa Deha Pashamidrisham Yapitam Swalilaya Jayena Divya Jivanam Yapitam Swalilaya Jayena Divya Jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishna Ishwaram. Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namah. Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatam Bhuvi Grinantiye Bhurida Jana. So we are in the midst of Friday, March 9th, 1883, in the New York edition of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. It's in the lower third of page 185. 185, in the chapter The Master's Birthday Celebration at Dakshineshwar. Sri Ramakrishna returned to his room with the devotees. Looking at a picture of Yashoda on the wall, he said, "It is not well done. She looks like a garland seller." Yes, and that's the way I feel about many pictures I see. Sri Ramakrishna, of course, had a very sharp eye, and he had a very artistic eye. Plus, he had a deep knowledge of what spirituality and spiritual people and spiritual moods look like. He could tell at a glance whether something expressed the proper mood or not. And so obviously this picture of Yashoda was not at all to his liking. I have the same problem with many of the touched up photographs of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji. I can't bear most of them. Some of them are very good. Some that are just colorized, but are the actual photograph, but colorized. Some are done extremely well. But the ones where they try to smooth out the features and add a little artistry, I can't bear them. So I can, from my much lower level of perception than Sri Ramakrishna's, I can fully appreciate what he says here. The master enjoyed a nap after his noon meal. Adhar and other devotees gradually gathered. This was Adhar's first visit. He was a deputy magistrate and about 30 years old. 30, and he was a deputy magistrate. Adhar to the master. "Sir, I have a question to ask. Is it good to sacrifice animals before the deity? It certainly involves killing." So now that, of course, is a natural question that arises in many people's minds nowadays. Even in Dakshineshwar now, they have stopped animal sacrifice. And so the present current of thought seems to be against it. But of course, in Sri Ramakrishna's time, it was very prevalent in temples to the Divine Mother. In Shakta temples, it was very prevalent. I once, when I was a brahmachari in India at the training center, I made a casual offhand remark about the animal sacrifice at Dakshineshwar, and somewhat making a little fun of one aspect of it, the crudity, what appeared to me as the crudity of it, and a South Indian brahmachari from the Chennai Center, who I thought, he being a South Indian, he being a very orthodox South Indian, he would certainly not like the animal sacrifice. So I expected a laugh, or at least a positive comment from him. But he scolded me right and left. He said that you, and he didn't say you, he didn't direct it at me, though of course it was meant for me. He said that people have no problem killing animals to feed themselves, to eat for themselves. But somebody sacrifices an animal to the deity first and then eats it, and then suddenly everyone is morally outraged. That's just hypocrisy. And he went on slashing me and right and left, and I deserved it. Because if one has no problem with eating meat, but has a problem with offering meat to the deity or animal sacrifice to the deity and then eating the prasad, then of course that is pure hypocrisy. So anyway, Adhar was asking a very modern question, one that was modern at that time also because of Western education, though meat eating was quite prevalent, of course, but among the English, but it was again seen as a primitive, horrendous practice by the British. So, sir, I have a question to ask. Is it good to sacrifice animals before the deity? It certainly involves killing. Master, the Shastra prescribes sacrifice on special occasions. Such sacrifice is not harmful. Take, for instance, the sacrifice of a goat on the 8th day of the full or the new moon, Ashtami, of the Krishna Paksha or Shukla Paksha. The Ashtami, the 8th day of the full moon. There, Sri Ramakrishna says that it's prescribed for devotees, or prescribed by the Shastras for the priest, and that there's no harm in it. Then he goes on to say, I am now in such a state of mind that I cannot watch a sacrifice. Also, I cannot eat meat offered to the Divine Mother. Therefore, I first touch my finger to it, then to my head, lest she should be angry with me. So Sri Ramakrishna would not risk offending the Devi, the goddess, by disparaging the sacrifice. So he would touch it and touch it to his forehead out of respect. But he had come to such a state where he couldn't eat it. So that's different. That's not moral outrage because of what appears to someone as peculiar, not understanding the origins of the practice. It was based on the fact that he had become so sattvic that he could neither watch the killing, the sacrifice of an animal, nor could he eat the prasad. But even then, he would touch it out of respect to his forehead. And he continues, again, in a certain state of mind, I see God in all beings, even in an ant. At that time, if I see a living being die, I find consolation in the thought that it is the death of the body, the soul being beyond life and death. So even seeing the death of a living being like an ant, even that he would have to find consolation in the fact that, yes, the consciousness within the ant is released from that form, because the self of all creatures is not subject to birth or to death. And so again, because his mind was in such a sattvic state, and because he had the ability to so identify with everything, he couldn't bear seeing the sufferings of others. He couldn't bear the killing of other things, but he would keep his mind steady in the midst of the life and death drama of ordinary daily life by reminding himself, or the fact that he knew experientially, that for the self there is no death. Then he goes on, one should not reason too much. It's enough if one loves the lotus feet of the mother. Too much reasoning throws the mind into confusion. You get clear water if you drink from the surface of a pool. Put your hand deeper and stir the water and it becomes muddy. Therefore, pray to God for devotion. Now, that's very true. That's a very wonderful teaching. We have to understand it properly, because in the beginning of spiritual life, there's every reason to inquire, to question, to try to figure things out, to try to understand. But once we have faith that God is, and that my purpose is to come to God, then all of that reasoning only disturbs the mind. Trying to figure out the subtleties and getting lost in the intricacies of philosophy and so forth. Yes, for a person who's on the path of knowledge, that itself can be part of their path. Shastra charcha, discussion and mulling over the meaning of the scriptures. But for a person on the path of devotion, once you know where it is that you're to go, then to get the mind constantly stirred up with doubt by wondering, well, is this right? Is that right? Is this true? Is that true? Then it only impedes our devotion. So there's a place later in the gospel where Sri Ramakrishna pleads with him, please promise me that you won't reason anymore. And that's because M was on the path of devotion. And he knew, he already had deep faith in Sri Ramakrishna. He had deep faith in the existence of God. He had deep faith in the possibility of realizing God because he had a perfected master. And so for him, there was no need for reasoning. That was only something that would impede him. And for those who might think that, well, that's very different from Swami Vivekananda, who told us to reason everything out. Oh yes, Swamiji also, he said, reason everything out, believe once you have understood, and only accept once you've understood. But he said, in places such as Raja Yoga, in his lecture on discipleship and other places, once you have understood and you have got your compass in the right direction, then don't go on reasoning after that. Then move forward with single-minded devotion towards the goal, whether you're on the path of knowledge or the path of devotion. Then we have to avoid such botherations. And that's a very interesting analogy. The surface of the water in a little puddle or in a small pond is clear, and if you sip the water from the top of then you get clear water. But if you put your hand in and start stirring things up, then you only get muddy water. And so that's what happens when we, after we have understood things, if we go on trying to stir up the mind and the doubts of the mind and so forth through reasoning. He continues, behind Dhruva's devotion there was desire. He practiced austerities to gain his father's kingdom. But Prahlada's love for God was motiveless, a love that sought no return. So yes, Dhruva, he practiced intense austerities and was very devoted. In fact, that's why the North Star is called a Dhruva Tara. This steady star which doesn't move where the heavens spin around it, but it remains the same because of his fixed devotion. But it wasn't motiveless. It was because he wanted his father's kingdom back, which had been unrightfully taken from him. But Prahlad had no other motive but pure love for God. His was motiveless ahetuki bhakti. Motiveless love for God. And so he is the exemplar of pure devotion, which was higher than that of Dhruva, a devotee. How can one realize God, Master? Through that kind of love, that is, that kind of love that Prahlad had, ahetuki bhakti. But one must force one's demand on God. One should be able to say, "O God, wilt thou not reveal thyself to me? I will cut my throat with a knife." This is the tamas of bhakti. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say we have to exert the tamas of bhakti. That what, I've given up everything for you. You can't ignore me now. You must show yourself to me now. And if we have once we have devoted ourselves to God, then we have that power to exert the tamasic bhakti, to threaten the beloved, as it were. Devotee, can one see God? Master: Yes, surely. One can see both aspects of God, God with form and without form. One can see God with form, the embodiment of spirit. Again, God can be directly perceived in a man with a tangible form. Seeing an incarnation of God is the same as seeing God himself. God is born on earth as man in every age. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. In every age I body myself forth, as Sri Krishna says. And so Sri Ramakrishna gives the same promise here, that in every age God comes in human form. For the liberation of the good, for the destruction of evil, and for the maintenance of dharma. So Sri Ramakrishna gives that assurance here, that which Sri Krishna gave several thousand years ago. And also he says that to see an incarnation of God is to see God. That's an extraordinary statement. That means that those who saw Sri Ramakrishna, those who saw the Holy Mother, they had the benefit of having seen God. Did all realize it? No. There were those many people who were steeped in ignorance. They didn't know what they were seeing. But for those who knew what they were seeing, that was the direct vision of God. And if they had gone far enough, that itself would be enough to take them eventually to liberation. And so this is a wonderful statement that seeing an incarnation of God is the same as seeing God himself. So we will end on that note for today. This was a short, well, not a short class, it's a long class, but most of it was taken up with technical difficulties. I'm sorry for that, but I appreciate your patience. And right now I don't have the sound on to see that the sound is coming through, but no one has written that it stopped. And so I assume that the sound continued till now. And so I appreciate your patience in staying with the process. And I'll close with the chant. Before the chant, let me just say that on Sunday we will have a lecture, and next week we'll have the classes as usual. And now each time I'm learning a little bit more about the system we have. And so hopefully next time it will be error-free. The only thing I did, which finally made it work after nothing else worked, was I unplugged the Shure transmitter and plugged it back in, and then suddenly everything worked. So God knows why. Or as the Veda says, maybe even he knoweth not. So if anyone knows, God knows why. So a closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhrita Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama.